Today is Sunday, the 2nd of January 2022. You're listening to Observer Radio's Year in Review, which is being presented here on The Big Issues on Observer Radio 91.1 FM. Our fourth and final part of today's Year in Review presentation is a panel discussion on societal issues and politics, of course relating to 2021. We have joining us on the line for this discussion the Honourable Minister Lennox Weston. Of course, he's the Minister of Works and, of course, Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance. Minister Weston, how are you doing this afternoon?
Fine, thank you. How are you doing, sir?
Quite well, quite well. We have as well with us the Honourable Senator Sean Nicholas. She is an opposition senator in the Senate, of course, a General Secretary as well of the United Progressive Party. Good afternoon to you, Ms. Sean Nicholas. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Kieran, to you, your listeners, and to my fellow panelists. Happy New Year.
And we have joining us as well Attorney at Law, Ms. Joanne Massiah, President of the Democratic National Alliance. She joins us on Zoom as well. Good afternoon to you, Ms. Joanne Massiah. We are having a little bit of audio trouble with you there, Ms. Massiah. I see you are unmuted, but I haven't heard your audio as yet. Perhaps I will see if I could sort that out.
Good afternoon.
Lovely.
Are you hearing me now?
Lovely. I can hear you beautifully now.
Okay. Good afternoon to everyone, and Happy New Year to all. Thank you for having me.
Ms. Sean Nicholas, I wonder if I could begin with you. We started off a little late, so I'll get right into it. Your reflections on really and truly governance in 2021. I wanted this to be an opportunity where the political parties could sort of meet each other in terms of the governance issues of 2021. What are your reflections on governance in 2021, how the COVID-19 pandemic and other issues have been handled?
As I said, good afternoon to everyone. Well, as you said, COVID, I think that was perhaps one of the biggest issues and perhaps have had the greatest impact on the governance as we saw it. If I could just quickly say that if we were to look at the management of COVID, I think I can break it down in 3 areas. The medical aspect, the operational aspect, and the communication aspect. I think where the medical area was concerned, of course, we followed the guidelines of the WHO and PAHO, and the medical professionals did what they were expected to do. However, I think in the early, there were many concerns that they were not allowed to manage or to do what they had to do independently. We think that they should have been allowed to function and saw little less of government and political interference in the way in which they were allowed to do their work. We know, for example, the Prime Minister was known to be making various statements in his Facebook posts and his weekly radio programs outside of the ambit of the medical professionals. So I think that they should have allowed from the get-go to be the ones carrying the message of this pandemic and how it's being handled. In terms of the operational side, I think much more could have been done. We talked, for example, of the need that there was no relief. No, there was this lack of relief where people were concerned, small businesses, landlords, the banks attempted to do something in the early stages. And I think in terms of where the people who were suffering, the government could have done so much more where that is concerned. I know we heard of places like the IDC and the new hospital, the mini hospital at Nugent Avenue. And while we welcome those, we are still asking as to the cost involved in some of these things and whether or not you might say there is a benefit, but at what cost? And I'm hoping that we could get some, further explanation on that. And in the communication side of it, I think it's a complete failure where that was concerned. Communication was key. In a key component in this campaign, and when we reflect, we realize that there was much hesitancy in terms of the vaccine. We had heard one of the earlier panelists talking about the conflict in information that we were getting. We were getting information from all sources. And I think that we lost a golden opportunity in terms of addressing communication flow and what goes out into the public. So I think the campaign, the communication campaign, was a big failure. And even the way the campaign was rolled out, let it not be lost that the botch, you spoke about it earlier, Kieran, when we were trying to build confidence among the population in terms of this vaccination campaign, and the Prime Minister went privately and took it, and somehow it got out. And I think that was a big blow in terms of the campaign, in terms of building confidence in the campaign or vaccination campaign. So for me, the communication rollout of the campaign was a big F. And up to this day, we are still feeling the effect of it. So overall, I think where the management of the COVID crisis was concerned, I think that we left a lot to be desired, I think, where that is concerned. And as you rightfully said, that in itself was perhaps the greatest impact in terms of governance for 2021. And that's my opening comment.
Let me allow Minister Weston to jump in. Minister Weston, in response to that, and I would also ask the broad question, whether or not you're satisfied with the government's performance in terms of 2021 handling the COVID-19
Yeah,
pandemic.
sure. Thanks a lot. I noticed that every time we begin to speak about COVID, we get bogged down into what could have been done better, what wasn't perfect, and so forth. But as we all know, that COVID presented an existential threat to the entire world. And so while there are always little political points to score and that things can be done better, the overall issue is that the world has survived COVID, that the scientific community internationally has been able to respond to provide a vaccine and to provide behavioral protocols that essentially roll back what at the very beginning looked like a threat to wipe out the entire world. Economies went into a tailspin, and at the end of 2021, all of us, all countries, including Antigua and Barbuda, we have put in place all the essential elements to manage this crisis. I think everybody in Antigua would have heard about the protocols and what they need to do. We have all the vaccines available for those who want to take the vaccines, and we have been able to bring the numbers to a very low point. Sadly, we have had a lot of deaths, but relative to other countries, I think we did perform fairly well. And we actually had growth, economic growth, and a restoration of the tourism industry and restoration of jobs. And so we have now removed the curfew, and so life is close to maybe 70-80% going back towards normal. In other words, we have survived, and those who want to, get the little small brownie points, they're welcome to do that. But I'm not going to be wasting my time in terms of those little brownie points. We have survived. We have grown economically. People are back to work. We have saved lives. We have mourned those we have lost, and the world now has a grip as to how to handle this pandemic.
Let me bring in DNA President Ms. Joanne Massiah. Ms. Joanne Massiah, your general reflections on 2021 in terms of governance and more specifically on the issue of COVID-19, just to start.
Okay, what I would say is that in terms of governance issues, that I think the lessons for us all in Antigua and Barbuda, particularly those in leadership positions, and I use leadership very broadly speaking, whether it be in the NGO community, CBO community, politics, and so on. The greatest lesson for me over the past year or so, and certainly over a longer period, is how not to govern generally. I see that the government's failures are specifically focused on what appears to be a disinterest in building and nurturing sustainable relationships within the society, among some of these groups I've mentioned, the NGOs, the CBOs, the unions, political parties, and so on. We can just look at the deteriorating relationship which seems to have no end between the government, the central government, the cabinet, and the Barbuda Council, for example. And in the context of COVID, we in the DNA have, from inception, we have been like a stuck record, using that simple yet important C word, consultation. Why not bring people to the table? Why not solicit and elicit the opinions of others? In a previous section, somebody said, use influencers within communities, within neighborhoods, to try to bring one simple message. But as I said, the government was intent on remaining tone deaf to any other view except its own. In terms of how not to run government, I think what we've seen is a failure of statesmanship in Antigua and Barbuda by the propensity of the Prime Minister in particular to call, name calling, shaming people, and just behaving in a manner that is most unbefitting of the office that he holds. I see also a major failure is the government's inability to unite the country through an appeal to our better selves by first leading by example. And again, I say starting with the Prime Minister and the executive, because these are the key indicators as to whether and how best we are going to emerge from this crisis and ensure that all Antigua and Barbuda, all Antiguans and Barbudans can benefit from opportunities that certainly are usually inherent in every crisis. So I believe, I don't think it's too late, but there has to be a commitment from those who are leading this country and running this country to want to do better and to do more for the people of Antigua and Barbuda.
Coming back to you, Senator Sean.
Really.
Senator Sean Nicholas, I want to get a sense from you. You were quite critical of the government's handling of things throughout 2021 in specific areas. I'm wondering, specifically in terms of the issue of, because it's often mentioned by the opposition, this issue of stimulus and more support. I mean, we were seeing a situation in which we had a serious decline in revenue. And there was some effort made, even in my own reading of the budget, to maintain spending in certain critical areas such as health, such as works, and a number of other areas, and making sacrifices in other areas. So my question to you is it really fair to really expect stimulus in addition to that in the face of an existential crisis?
Well, there is stimulus and there is relief. I think what we were pushing for was mainly for relief to persons. In fact, the United Progressive Party put forward a proposal to the cabinet back in March 2021 in terms of outlining some of the relief that could be brought to various sectors of the economy. I know, for example, it dealt with small and medium-sized businesses, the landlord, unemployed, what we could do in education. It lists a whole gamut of areas where relief could have been offered. And that was nothing at all was done. Or, I mean, even if they did not accept the proposals, we didn't see anything like that coming from the government. But the other point I want to make here, relief doesn't come in one way. When we look back at the management of the crisis for the last 18 months or so, every time we went to Parliament dealing with the management of the crisis or pandemic as it is globally, it was always to impose restrictions. Why wasn't there any time we say, let's go to Parliament to look at legislation for relief, whether it's tax benefits or whatever it is? So we're saying that, yes, we are not necessarily saying pay out, but the people, the areas, the sectors that were suffering, no relief at all, no relief. went to those areas. And that is basically what we're saying. And it's not too late because people are still suffering. People are still out of work. The minister said that people are going back to work, but some people are going back to work being underemployed. And not everyone who was unemployed will be getting a job going forward. And the uncertainty going forward as well. And we think it's not too late for some consideration to be given to areas and to persons who could benefit from such relief to take them over until things become a little better.
Coming back to you, Minister Weston, in terms of the management of the economy, I'm curious for your reflections as to what has been achieved this year, and then I will ask our other panelists to rebut.
I think we took a particular approach in terms of how you handle a pandemic and how we handle economic crisis. And we are of the view that good practice and good sense means that you invest in areas that will, first of all, deal with the crisis at hand, which is the pandemic. How do you treat that? How do you manage that so you get control of it? And secondly, how do you invest in areas that will allow you to restore the economy and restore growth and restore jobs quickly? And so that is why when some members of the opposition and some commentators were into relief, Antigua and Barbuda has a wide array of relief programs. I don't know if sometimes we forget that in Antigua and Barbuda, medical benefits provide health care for chronic diseases totally free, which in many other countries they pay for. I had a godmother in St. Kitts who had an operation, and the cost of that operation was quite high. In Antigua and Barbuda, they get that operation free. We have relief programs where they get vouchers. We were giving out food packages. We had discount and delayed payments. We had the bank deferring charges. We had renters not putting people out. We had a whole array of targeted individuals who were hurting and who we could provide some relief to. But the biggest issue was to maintain what we call aggregate demand so that the private sector can survive. And so what we did, for example, in keeping everybody employed in the government, we were pumping close to $70 million in payout every month through salaries and paying for services into the general economy so that people will have disposable income, they can shop and keep the private sector alive. We also invested in growth-enhancing structures. And so for the port, we now have the cruise ship pier open, and you can see the benefit of that. We are going full speed ahead with our area in terms of port development. Our roadways, we have done that. We've repaired government buildings, and we've done tremendous amount of housing where we can empower not only our small contractors, but we can also empower people in terms of better living. In Antigua and Barbuda, unlike many other countries, education is free. You can get health care for free. You can get major services that you require to survive and to have a good life in Antigua and Barbuda fully subsidized. In many other countries, they don't exist. And so I don't accept that there are no reliefs. What they're talking about, they were looking for the government to raise millions to give financial handout. It does not make sense in small economies where we cannot print our own money and where we will be burdening the future growth and recovery with high debt. And that is why in this year we have growth already. When the UPP had their crisis, which was not even close to the crisis we face, they had 4 years of negative growth because they did not understand basic economics in terms of how you invest and how do you spend money wisely so you can not only keep the population alive and treat the threat, but you can also recover very quickly and restore growth and restore jobs. And I think the proof is in the pudding. We already have 4% growth still in the middle of the pandemic. And we are seeing tourism roaring back, and we are seeing our infrastructure going, and we are seeing our construction sector booming, our transport sector booming, and we're going to continue to create jobs and drive investment.
Ms. Joanne Massiah, your response in terms of the economic affairs of 2021 and how they have been influenced and affected by the government's actions?
Well, I've listened to Minister Weston, tout all these grand things that government is doing and all that is free and so on. But I think the critical question becomes, and ought to be, this is a government prior to 2020, March of 2020, with the onset of the pandemic. This is a government which boasted of previous years of unprecedented economic growth. But yet, at crisis time, at crunch time, it could do little to nothing to help the most vulnerable, both persons and businesses, to manage, to ride the wave, if you will. This is a government which is speaking about, and it is to be applauded, that they were able to keep public sector workers employed. But at the same time, they have a number of persons within and across ministries who are underemployed. And with all this growth and these projections for new economic areas and so on, the question has to be, has this government simultaneously sought to send persons overseas, whether for further training, for further education, to manage this new economy that it claims it is developing? Because when you put this unprecedented growth, when you put this 4% growth that I heard the Prime Minister say we've already experienced this year, alongside underemployment and escalating cost of living, you ask yourself, what is the net effect to people? People in this country, a majority of them remain nutritionally poor. They are living barely so from paycheck to paycheck. They're still unable to pay the utility bills and the most basic services that they're responsible for paying as consumers in this country. And so you ask yourself, who is the government trying to appease? Who is it trying to fool? Its own supporters, so that they continue to spew this recital that they've been fed, when they know jolly well that the realities of their lives do not reflect that narrative. You see, if we're going to build a new society and a new economy, we have got to begin to discuss issues such as retooling of workers, retraining of our public sector, reskilling persons, and to engage in regular dialogue and consultation with our private sector actors as to the role they will play, as to where these new and emerging sectors and niche areas are going to be, so that persons can properly prepare themselves. The people can make the necessary investments where they know, with government support, with an economy that is growing and is being diversified in a manner which the DNA continually speaks about, that there is room for them, that their prospects of success are going to be great. Why? Because you have a government that is facilitating their interests, that is driving the process and has their back at crisis time. So I don't buy all this nonsense about this is free and that is free. I want to ask Senator Weston to speak about the fact that this government, in the middle of this pandemic, has failed to put the necessary resources into the Clearview facility, because with all these lockdowns and so on, the DNA from the beginning spoke about the adverse effects that the curfew, the state of emergency, and these lockdowns would have on people's mental health. And we have seen it, we have advocated, and we're happy that first it started with, I think, 3 or 4 young ladies who are trained and whose professional work involves mental health advocacy. They started. And to accept that the government perhaps has begun to jump onto this bandwagon, these are areas that need to be invested in. We look at the effect that it has had on our teachers and our students in particular, who were forced to no fault of their own, and I'm not necessarily saying it is a fault of the government either, to adjust to a new learning environment. And we ask ourselves, and we should be asking ourselves, had this e-book initiative that this government advanced in its first term been managed successfully, would our students have had the kinds of trouble, the kinds of frustrations, the kinds of just peril that they were faced, where a number of them did not have devices, others did not have internet in their homes to be able to do the Google Classroom. So government needs to sit down, this government needs to sit down and have a proper developmental plan, a long-term developmental plan for where each sector is going to go, how interconnected the sectors are, and the skill sets and the competencies that are needed to run a successful country of approximately 100,000 people.
Sean Nicholas, your take on this question, the economics of 2021 and the extent to which the government could have been positively impactful, and how you would grade its activities in 2021.
Yes, Kieran. I listened to Minister Weston list the number of things that the government has done and is doing. And I would just say that the government is doing what the government normally does. I mean, I was waiting to hear of things that are new. What are the new areas of the economy? What is the area of growth? I have not heard of any new legislation in terms of going to Parliament to talk about the new areas of growth. We haven't heard anything, for example, of how we intend to diversify the economy. And by diversifying, I'm not meaning the usual talk we have about agriculture and agro-processing and all of that. But for example, how are we going to leverage technology, the use of technology, and all the areas and options that are open? How, with this new economy, I am waiting to hear that these are the areas or these are the ways in which government intend to go forward when we talk about growth in the economy. The roads, the housing, the port development, these were projects that were in train. So I have not yet heard anything new in terms of what it is that is going to take us out of where we are now. What is new? What can we look forward to? And in terms of what was already done, I would just say the government is just continuing programs that are already in train and seeing us through. So I am not impressed at all as to where we are at this point in time.
Minister Weston, your response?
Yeah, I think I listened to the representative of the UPP and also of the DNA, and I think they are quite bored in their homes. They're looking for a fancy show. And economy is an economy is an economy. Basically, this economy is tourism-based, and I know it sounds hip to say diversification. This economy will be tourism-based for the next 20 or more years. That is where we have a comparative advantage. Our natural environment, our beauty, our people, and all the temperature and all the water and all the food, that is where we can compete. Tourism is the most robust industry. It recovers from gun shooting, from war, from strife, from hurricane. It is robust, it is strong. That is how we earn our income. And when you have a pandemic and you need to recover, you recover the sectors that drive the economy. This is not a little dolly house game where you're trying to do something new to show off a skill. This is running a real country to real lives. And so, yes, you must focus on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are tourism, construction, education and educational services. And we then have the niche sectors which are emerging, which will take some time. And these include the technology it's used, and that starts with education. And in education, we are pushing UWI. I don't know if they heard about the new investment in terms of the landed campus, which they said couldn't happen, and the association we have in terms of the technology and the young students who are now pursuing a particular course in computer science. and how we intend to do that. You would have heard that we have the two leaders in cryptocurrency residing in Antigua and Barbuda. You would have heard that stem cell is being done in Antigua and Barbuda. But these are niche areas. They do not drive the economy. They do not provide most of the livelihood and welfare. And so if you're running a country, you don't spend all your time on emerging sector. You get the fundamentals in place. And so, yes, we focus on tourism, cruise tourism. So we have the airport expanded, being the best airport in the region. We have our cruise port being the best cruise port. We have an association with a private contractor, which they all claim was bad for Antigua and Barbuda. They're now bringing the ships here. I hear nothing about that. We have Barbuda that has the biggest single investment in the Caribbean, driving employment, driving capacity in terms of future demand in tourism. And we have an innovative area in terms of our port, where we intend not only to just be a port for cargo, but to be a transshipment point. And so, yes, there are some fancy things you could do which are on the edge, and we expect our students who are at UWI, we expect our students who are studying abroad, we expect our natural creators will do their stuff. As you heard, the recent appointment of Michael Brown is in the area of innovation and creativity, and that means the government is now having a minister who focuses specifically on how we can monetize our cultural products, how we can monetize new technology. But Antigua and Barbuda is the home of cryptocurrency. Antigua and Barbuda is the first country who did the whole issue of offshore gaming. Antigua and Barbuda is the country that we also did the whole issue of shipping with atoms. So that we have had a proud history of innovation. But least you forget, when you're running a country, get your fundamentals in place. It is not a fancy show of saying, I've done something new. Get the fundamentals working, and then you can add on the niche areas afterwards.
Senator Weston, I do want to ask you for your feedback on this special economic zone. It has been a topic which has interested a lot of people this year. I personally myself, just one second. I just want to say I personally myself had a look at the license order. And if I'm to be frank, I every time I read one, whether it's for YIDA, whether it's for another zone, I get the idea that it's something that's pulled up from a draft. The language is always very conciliatory, and it tends to give an investor the impression that absolutely no obstacles and regulations will be put in their way whatsoever. I've always found it very, very odd, if I'm to be just honest and frank.
But let me tell you, I'm glad you raised the question, because I think that people are generally concerned. They read it in the sense of it being an onshore sector. And let me say that this whole mechanism of special economic zone has been around, as you know, for the last 70, 80, 100 years. It is the mechanism by which China, the Hong Kong, the Asian tigers utilize. Essentially, it is an economic tool where you operate as if you're not part of the country, where all the tax laws and all the issues which normally apply for onshore issues do not apply. And so that you're saying to individuals, if you come to Antigua and Barbuda, you can produce for markets external to Antigua and Barbuda without paying and meeting all the tax and other regulatory conditions you meet onshore. Now, that is attractive and has been attractive to many companies because they import stuff and they re-export it. The idea of that is that you will create add-on industries. People will rent businesses. People will have supply. They have transshipment agents. They'll have transportation. They will eat. They will also see other onshore investments that they might want to do. Now, it has worked in Asia. It has not been as successful in the Caribbean. Jamaica has some, and they have worked fairly well, although it is true that the wages have been fairly low. The idea is, though, if these sectors really attract the investment they're targeted to attract, let's say, for example, that they do get 3,000, 2,000 offshore students in new schools, or they get 4 or 5 major companies doing manufacturing, and these individuals have to rent homes onshore. These individuals have to go to the supermarket and wholesale to buy. These individuals must use utility onshore. These individuals will have to use our hospital services. They will have to buy insurance for other things and so on. Then you can see you could have an impact. You could have an impact. People, of course, can say, I don't like that tool. I don't think it's a tool government should do. I don't think the offshore sector is something that I like. But I'll ask them to read the economic history of Asia, and you will see that the Hong Kongs and even China, they use special economic zone in Shanghai and so forth to attract the American companies. And they do, yes, have virtually free status as if they're not part of the state. Now, in Europe, in Ireland, everybody knows that Ireland became the headquarters of international corporation because in these zones, they're not totally free, but they have significantly reduced taxation. And they have been able to lure these huge corporations to put their company headquarters in Ireland. Now, it's very important for us as small states to recognize that we should not buy into the view of large countries that taxation is not a legitimate tool of competition. That has been a sore point for us, where they have asked us to compete on every area of production, every factor of production that we can compete on, in terms of scale, in terms of cost of money, in terms of factor of production, in terms of agglomeration theory. They want us to compete. In the area we have a competitive advantage, where we can survive with smaller taxes and smaller tax yield, they say it is illegal. And we have some of our members in our country not understanding that they're buying into a view that small countries cannot use their taxation mechanism as a competitive tool. We can survive on less than a 50% taxation on corporation because we do not have the factors of attraction which America has. We don't have the markets. We don't have the cost of money. So we have to compete in terms of taxation. Whether or not this will work, the proof is in the eating. Do we attract investors? If we don't attract investors, we're not losing anything. If we do attract what they hope to attract, I can guarantee you the impact will be major. It will be substantial. I mean, just a simple school, AUA, in terms of rental for cars, in terms of rental for people with properties, that has generated significant impact. Now, YIDA has not performed the way we expected, and that's very clear. Will this new one perform that way? The issue is, should we not try? Should we sit down and leave 600 acres of land, which was private sector owned, by the way, which was idle for 200 years, that we must continue to leave it idle, or we should try something? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We lose nothing. If it does provide what they expect to attract, both at YIDA and in this new economic zone, I will tell you the impact will be substantial. And you only need to read Asia and what they've done in Asia in these zones to see that it is something which can work. And if it does work in Antigua and Barbuda, we will not be losing, we'll be gaining significantly.
Ms. Massiah.
May I jump in here?
Yes, Ms. Massiah, sorry, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just want to remind Minister Weston that YILDA is a failed experiment. And the Western Imperial Economic Zone will be another failed experiment. How many failures is this administration willing to put the people of Antigua and Barbuda through? He speaks about all the things I'm hearing him say. I'm wondering if he's living on Fantasy Island. Because when I hear Senator Weston and when I hear the Prime Minister, particularly in the New Year's Day address, I am wondering if they are totally and completely oblivious to the realities facing the grassroots people, to the realities facing pensioners, our youth who are both unemployed and underemployed, and the persons who, when they get up in the morning, they are hopeless. They remain hopeless. Why doesn't he speak to the vulgar concessions that the Western Imperial Zone has got? He speaks about tourism being, will be the economic savior. One catastrophe, and 75% of our population remains unemployed and underemployed. Minister Weston, wake up. The fact of the matter is, I know that you are not oblivious to high inflation generally. You're not oblivious to the supply chain challenges that are facing the world globally, recognizing that our economy is largely import-based. What are you telling the people of Antigua and Barbuda? That they must continue to rely on the trickle-down benefits that sometimes never reach them. I want to tell you that food is the future. And our Prime Minister Gaston Brown knows this. And this is why he has strategically positioned himself with his farm. Because come hell or high water, come hardships or not, people have to eat. And with the escalating cost of living and the prices of foods that we import, which can be grown here, the Prime Minister is positioning and has positioned himself to be the next major local producer of food in Antigua and Barbuda. And I don't have any problem if somebody sees an opportunity, but where we're talking about good governance issues, the Prime Minister should have first sought to restructure the agricultural sector. He should have first sought to bring the farmers together to ask of them, what are your challenges? He should have met with the technicians to know what are the crops that can be easily grown here, sustainably so. He should have made an investment in storage facilities so that we don't have this glut and wastage on our markets. And simultaneously, he should have begun to have discussions about primary manufacturing, about agro-processing. And so he should have brought those stakeholders together and to say, what is it that you need? How can we reposition this aspect of our economy to feed the very tourism sector that they seem intent to be the sole economic driver for the economy of Antigua and Barbuda for the next 50 years? We've been in tourism for over 50 years. How has the average Antiguan and Barbudan benefited? Are we just there, as he would say when he was in opposition, to be hewers of wood and drawers of water? Are they there just to be gardeners and so on? What economic opportunities are you putting before the locals of this country? What are you telling them? What are you telling us? What are these niche areas? And your Prime Minister all of a sudden has begun to speak about a diversified economy as well. What opportunities in this vision for a diversified economy that the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party claims it has? What is the role for locals? How are locals going to be incentivized? How are we supposed to position our resources, whether it be through collaborative opportunities with other people to take advantage of these opportunities? And how will our educational system and the curricula be redesigned so that our students can fit into this new diversified economy that you all speak about, which you have no clue about? It is clear from what you said that you're just going to, you're content not to seek to diversify anything, to just continue to give away everything in the shop called Antigua and Barbuda, and to continue to have the people suffer. The people of Antigua and Barbuda want real opportunities, and they want it now. They want a government that has a vision for the diversification of the economy, for the restructuring of our education system, for the restructuring of our societies, and they want that now. And that is what the DNA is offering. So take your head out of the sand on your fantasy island.
Senator Sean Nicholas? Yes, of course. Yes, and then I'm going to jump very quickly back to Senator Weston. Not Senator Weston, Minister Weston, sorry.
Special Economic Zone. I just like to remind your listeners that, or to say first to your listeners, that we have not learned from the YIDA experiment. YIDA was to have pumped into this economy over $2 billion over 10 years, which is over $2 million every year. 7 years on, we are still waiting to reap the dividends of YIDA. And I want to remind Minister Weston, when he was the leader of government business in the Senate, I remember us debating this, and we were making the case for a performance clause to be part of the YIDA contract. And not quoting him, but Senator Weston, as he was then, his argument was that the performance clause is like a bureaucratic red tape that delays these projects coming on island. And here we are, 7 to 8 years later, we are still waiting to see the benefits and feel the benefits of YIDA. And the same template is now being offered to another special economic zone, where the concessions, as you've heard, all concessions. We cannot see the real benefits to Antigua and Barbuda. YIDA has failed. We have not gained anything from YIDA, and we're going the same way again. Nothing in it for Antigua and Barbuda. So I just want to throw that in to remind your listeners.
Final word, Senator Weston.
Yeah, I am amazed at the passion politicians sometimes generate, and that they know what the people want. The results clearly show that DNA got 1.2% of the votes. So I don't know who they represent and who's into their vision. Clearly people are not pointing and buying their vision. The issue is that special economic zones are not unique to Antigua and Barbuda. If YIDA fails. That doesn't mean the tool is not a legitimate tool for development. It has been used throughout the world. As I said, if you look at Asia, it has proved to be very beneficial in Barbados. They had some in Jamaica. YIDA has had some challenges, as we all know. They have had a lot of legal trials where they've had issues on them trading in their lands and so on, and they're in court and they cannot do X, Y, Z. The fact is they paid $60 million to buy that land. They have also invested over $100 million to build facilities where haulers and so on have made money from it. Yes, it hasn't brought the industries we expect, and we hope that he succeeds. But it does not speak to the economic tool of special economic zone. And again, you must remember that those are private transactions where they bought land privately, where they invested their monies, and they're trying to do a business. Again, I want to make the example that AUA, with less than 1,000 students, has had a tremendous impact on Antigua Barbuda. We get about 300 overnight tourists at our best performance. If you get an offshore school or schools in these zones, which can bring 2,000 students here, 365 days or even 200 days of the year, it will virtually double our tourism. I don't think they understand the potential that these sectors have. We survive. This economy is driven by 300 overnight tourists, and then we have another 700 or 800 cruise passengers. That is what drives this economy. If those schools in those two economic zones can attract between them 2,000 medical students, they would have virtually doubled the impact of Antigua's tourism. And our economy is over $3 billion. So I think they need to just chill and take some time to understand fundamental economics, and that, yes, people have spoken about diversification till they die. You can tell Saudi Arabia to diversify, they still make most of their money from oil. You can still tell Russia to diversify, if the oil prices drop, they're in problems. Small economies do not have the luxury of being diversified. That is a fundamental rule of basic economics. It is really and truly, it's necessary for us to concentrate on what we are good at, what we have competitive advantage in. We do not need no subsidies for tourism. Tourism provides employment from the top in terms of the professionals right down to the lowest skill layer. Therefore, it generates employment for all. Local Antiguans are experts in tourism. Local Antiguans have invested in tourism. They have owned properties. And in truth and fact, you might say Barrett did not come from Antigua Barbuda, but Barrett has been an Antiguan for the last 25 years. And he owns over 30% of the hotel stock in this country. So that this whole issue of we're only hewers of wood and drawers of water. We now have a landed university of the West Indies here. Our students are going to get their degrees and they're taking up professional jobs. In the telecom sector, we're going to bring digitalization so we can have the type of platform required for people to really and truly exploit technology and sell it to the world. And what are we going to sell to the world? We're going to sell our cultural products. We're going to sell our talent, our drawings, our art, our music. We're going to sell our cuisine. We're going to sell our way of living, which is called tourism, that they can come and experience it. We're going to sell telecom services. We're going to sell medical services. We're going to sell to the rest of the world. So that in all critical areas, this government has not only made sure that the lights are kept on, that in the space of 12 months, after 17% decline in 1 year, we have been able to bounce back in the middle of a pandemic with a 4% growth, when our average was 5%. By any objective standard, that is a miracle performance.
Let me
performance
let
came
me jump
because
in.
workers in this country, the frontline workers in healthcare, the doctors, the nurses, the people who followed the protocol, the people who went and got vaccinated, they understood that we had to tame COVID. And those people in the hotel who are now back to work and providing A-class services,
I have to wrap up.
they all understand what it requires to run an economy. And I just want to say to the people of Antigua and Barbuda, the government is extremely proud for their support. We continue to ask for their support, and we continue to work very hard to make sure that they can get back to work and build back their lives and livelihood.
Very good. With that, we're going to have to end this segment here. We are, of course, massively over time, but it's New Year, so yay. I say thank you to all three of our guests. We were joined, of course, by the Honorable Minister Lennox Weston, Minister for Works, as well as a Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance. We were joined by Senator Sean Nicholas, Opposition Senator in the Senate, of course, and by DNA President Ms. Joanne Massiah. Thanks to all three of you for joining us this afternoon. It was a lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.